Hello from Gardening at Douentza here in Ireland, and today I'm taking you on a horticultural journey. While unfortunately I cannot bring you to the Himalayas and North America, home of the majestic rhododendron, I can bring you to one of Ireland's foremost collections. Today we're going to visit Mount Congreve Gardens in Waterford, where we'll learn all about rhododendrons. Everything from the difference between azaleas and rhodos to growing these beauties in your own garden. So come with me on my rhododendron journey. You are very welcome to this video all about the rhododendron, a large woody shrub that gets its name from the Greek. In Greek, rhodo means rose and dendron means tree. Rhododendrons have been popular garden plants for many years. Most are evergreen, offering glossy leaves through winter and an amazing abundance of showy flowers from January to June. Rhododendron Christmas cheer is the first to flower in my garden, usually in January despite its optimistic name. Some rhododendrons have peeling bark and others have giant leaves with a soft hairy back called indumentum. They can grow enormous, but there are smaller varieties too. The majority flower in May in a variety of different colours. In fact, surely every garden that can grow rhododendrons really must. But before we get into the how of growing rhododendrons, let's first explore the different types. The history of classification of rhododendrons is long and boring, so you'll be glad to hear I won't inflict it on you. From 1753 to 1996, the poor rhodo was classified and reclassified by reams of botanists, each eager to leave his mark. Today, we use the classification attributed to Chamberlain in 1996, and this allows for 8 subgenera to the genus known as rhododendron. 4 of these subgenera hold the vast majority of rhodos, and 3 of these subgenera hold azaleas. You may be surprised to learn that the azalea is not a genus. In fact, according to modern classifications, all azaleas are actually rhododendrons, but only some rhododendrons are azaleas. So, what is the difference between azaleas and rhododendrons? There are a number of differences between azaleas and rhododendrons, and the first has to do with foliage. Rhododendrons are nearly all evergreen. I think there are only 2 exceptions, and have large, oval, leathery leaves, which are often scaly or have small dots on the underside of the leaves. Azaleas have smaller, narrower foliage, which is often hairy along the midrib and underside of the leaf. Azaleas are further subdivided into 2 groups. There are Japanese azaleas, which are evergreen and enjoy a long history of hybridization and cultivation. And there are deciduous azaleas, which lose their leaves in autumn in a flurry of brilliant hues of yellow, orange and crimson. Rhododendrons tend to be bigger than azaleas, although there are dwarf alpine rhodas to be considered as well. Rhodo flowers are bigger than azalea ones, producing large bell-shaped flowers in clusters, but azaleas come in a more vivid array of shades. Orange, for example, is not a colour I've ever seen in rhodos, but it is in azaleas. Azalea blooms are smaller and either tubular or funnel-shaped, and azaleas are more often gloriously fragrant than rhodos. But the real and definitive way to discover whether you're looking at an azalea or a rhododendron is to count the stamens. Azaleas have 5 stamens, but rhododendrons have 10 or more stamens. Whether you have an azalea or a rhododendron, there are certain conditions you need to meet for growing success. And I suppose I should start here with the condition that may be the most difficult for you to meet. Rhododendrons need to be grown in acidic or ericaceous soil because they naturally grow on peaty soils in the Himalayas, Japan and China. Peat is nature's naturally acidic substrate, but you can have acidic soil without it being peaty. Soil acidity is measured according to the pH scale. The ideal pH for Rhodos is pH 4.5 to 6. Neutral soil has a pH of 7, and soil that's higher than that is considered alkaline. If you're starting out, the easiest way to ascertain whether your soil is acidic or not is to look at what your neighbours are growing. If they grow rhododendrons or if their hydrangeas are blue, then they have acidic soil, and there's a good chance you do too. Pink hydrangeas mean that their soil is alkaline and is not compatible with rhododendron growing. Failing this, there are kits that can be bought to measure soil pH. Take several samples from around your garden to ensure the most accurate result. If your neighbours have acidic soil but you do not, then it could be that your soil was limed for farm or vegetable growing purposes. And if so, this will wash out over 3 to 5 years. If liming has been done, you can balance this by planting with peat. You can alternatively apply sulfate of ammonia to lower soil pH before planting. However, if you do not have naturally acidic soil, any other solution, like building a raised bed or planting in plastic, is going to be difficult and costly. And my best advice to you is to give up on growing rhododendrons in the ground. But don't despair, because there are still 2 rhododendron growing options open to those with non-acidic soil. There are a couple of Rhodos from the Electra group that, according to the RHS, do not need acidic soil, and I'm scrolling these along the screen for you right now, so seek them out. And if you don't fancy those or can't source them, you can always grow Rhodos in pots. For pot growing, choose a plant that won't grow too big. Best choices are dense, compact plants with good foliage. Those with unusual or coloured foliage are particularly good, as they give you year-round interest. Evergreen azaleas like the yak and Williamsianum hybrids are a good choice for containers outdoors. More tender, scented varieties can be grown in a pot in a greenhouse or a cool conservatory. Rhododendrons really dislike central heating and seldom successfully grow as house plants, so they need to be grown in a cool greenhouse and placed outdoors in summer. Good choices here are Lady Alice Fitzwilliam, which I've spoken about in a lot of videos, and this is one of my absolute favourites that I actually grow outdoors. There's also the beautiful Fragrantissimum. Most rhododendrons aren't scented at all, but the ones that are absolutely amazing and deserve a position in anyone's collection. In this video description, you'll find a link to an RHS lecture on scented rhododendrons, which lists 19 of the best, many of which would be perfect for greenhouse pot cultivation. When potting Rhodos, buy ericaceous compost. In these times of environmental awareness, we must all try to avoid the use of peat, but for some plants like rhododendrons, it is the only option. Ericaceous compost can be bought in garden centres and is a mixture of peat, green waste and some fertiliser. For container growing of rhododendrons, you're advised to add perlite, grit or bark to the ericaceous mix to ensure good drainage. Ensure also that there are plenty of drainage holes in your pot and that they don't get blocked up. Feed potted plants with an ericaceous fertiliser and repot every 2 to 3 years. But whether growing in a container or the ground, rhododendrons need moist, well-drained, humus-rich soil in dappled shade. They also don't respond well to very exposed sites with cooler, drying winds. Deciduous azaleas are generally the most adaptable in the genus. A moist, acidic soil is still a must because, like rhododendrons, they're also shallow rooting, but they'll be a bit more forgiving on aspect, soil quality and exposure. I just want to suffix this by explaining that so much depends on your climate. The books specify how rhododendrons need dappled shade, and that's great advice if you're living in the Mediterranean or sunny California. However, if you're growing your Rhodos in overcast, rainy Ireland, then like me, you can get away with planting them in full sun. But for every rule, there is an exception, and alpine rhododendrons require full sun rather than dappled shade. In terms of moisture, you may find that you need to water your rhododendrons in a dry summer. Rhododendrons benefit from a mulch of conifer needles, which have a low pH, own compost or leaf mould in spring to help trap moisture in. Water well before mulching and apply the mulch immediately. Never mulch with manure. And for the same reason, it's best advised to plant or move Rhodos in autumn so that they don't suffer in a dry spring. When planting or moving your Rhodo, prepare your planting hole with a mixture of own compost, leaf mould, conifer needles or peat, the ingredients you'll use for mulching in spring. And don't plant too deeply. You need to ensure that the soil level in the ground is the same as the soil level was in the pot. Rhododendrons are shallow rooters. This is quite normal. You'll need to keep an eye on your newly planted Rhodos, ensuring that they're kept moist until well established. So now we've finished talking about the conditions needed for growing rhododendrons and how to plant them, and we're going to discuss maintenance. And the first thing to mention is deadheading. If the look of browning flowers does not bother you, then there's no need to deadhead your rhododendrons at all. In fact, it's quite impractical for large shrubs. However, some varieties look more unsightly than others when the flowers have gone over. And in this particular case, we can see how the brown flowers are arranged at the top of the growth. New growth will come from the base of the flower all the way around. You can see that here. So to deadhead, you need to break off the whorl of spent flower just here, just above the new growth. Usually they snap off quite easily, but use a secateurs if you need to. And it is worth deadheading young or newly planted bushes so that they don't waste valuable energy trying to produce seed at the expense of establishing roots. And now we move on to pruning. Now you may wish to prune your rhododendron, although no pruning is necessary, but it could be that you want to neaten up the plant or reduce its size. But not all rhododendrons can be pruned, and some will simply die if you try. The good news is that with azaleas it is clear cut. They can be pruned. Remember how we defined azaleas? Azaleas only have 5 stamens when in bloom, whereas Rhodos have 10 or more. Azaleas, whether evergreen or deciduous, should be pruned soon after flowering. The pruning of the evergreen azaleas, otherwise known as Japanese azaleas, can be more extensive than that of the deciduous ones. The evergreen azaleas actually produce 2 sets of foliage each season, a first in the spring followed by a second in the summer, and the loss of the first set of leaves is gradual and may not be noticed by a casual observer. They respond well to neatening up with the shears or secateurs. Be more circumspect with the deciduous azalea. Don't do too much pruning all at once. This isn't a bush to be clipped into a neat shape. It will have a more natural, organic presentation, and that should be respected. Water both well and mulch after pruning. And as for rhododendrons, To answer the question of whether or not a rhodo can be pruned, we must once again go back to the 1996 Chamberlain classification of rhododendrons. And according to that classification, rhodos with scaly leaves are called lepidote, and those with non-scaly leaves are called alepidote. All lepidotes can be cut back or pruned, and some alepidote rhodos can also be pruned. It can, however, be very hard to tell the difference between lepidote and alepidote rhodos from the back of the leaves. I spent a few hours trying to get to the bottom of it all so that I could show you in a meaningful way, but I have to concede defeat. So in conclusion, I must advise to choose your rhodo wisely, taking note of its eventual size. And once planted, if it's getting too big for its position, move it. Rhodos can be moved easily as they have shallow roots. With all rhodos, you can also remove occasional branches, cutting at the junction with the trunk. Remove a branch if it points in the wrong direction, or to improve the look of a bush, remove the lower branches. This is known as raising the tree's skirts and can be done with a variety of trees or bushes. And if that isn't enough and you really want to radically prune your rhodo but don't want to lose it, look closely to see if the bush has new growth coming from the base. This is an indication it will regenerate from there if cut hard back. Leaving aside pruning, what kind of problems might you encounter with a rhodo? And here the most common complaint is that the bush won't flower. Now, if your rhodo isn't flowering, it can be due to a variety of factors, from the plant being too young, needing water, to wrong soil or incorrect pruning. And if the rhodo has to divert its energies into survival because it's in too exposed a position or experiencing too much shade, then it won't have enough energy left to flower. Beware of adjacent evergreen trees which block light and steal moisture and nutrients. Yellowing leaves can also result from a variety of causes, from poor drainage to soil that is too alkaline. And late frosts can wither buds or crinkle leaves, especially on the earlier flowering varieties. Some of my species rhodos, like Sino Grande, regularly end up with browned flowers. And now we've almost come to the end of this video all about rhododendrons, but by way of completeness, let us just mention a few oddities. Rhododendron ponticum has done much to give the whole genus a very bad name here in Ireland, where it's invasive in the west of the country. And this is not a reason to shun the whole genus. Normally rhododendrons make fabulous, low maintenance garden plants that stay put where you plant them. And for the collectors among you, there are a few real oddities out there. There are the tropical rhodos that must be kept in heated greenhouses, many of them beautifully scented. And there are even epiphytic rhodos. These root in the leaf litter on other plants in the same way that orchids do. What an amazing and varied genus this is. I really hope my video has encouraged you to grow a rhododendron, and if you already grow rhodos, I hope it will help you to grow them better, or perhaps even seek out some exciting new varieties. Thank you as always for watching, and please remember that I do have 2 books for sale, details in the video description, along with that link to the 19 gloriously scented rhodos I'm sure you'll want to check out. And finally, do consider channel memberships. So if you click on the join button, you'll see the perks you'd get if you were to sign up to channel memberships, including free plant seeds and personalized videos. I guess I will see you on the next video, and in the meantime, do check out this video I made before about a rhododendron tour of my garden and my favorites, and this other video I made highlighting how much I love rhododendron Lady Alice Fitzwilliam. Bye!